One thing metal bands, country artists, and everyone in between have in common is that life on the road is a huge part of being a musician. Unfortunately, when you're driving around for hundreds of days each year, the odds of getting into an accident only go up. Opeth is a dramatic progressive metal band that incorporates elements of jazz and folk into their dark and foreboding sound. They spent much of the early 21st century as one of the most popular artists in their native Sweden, and have regularly toured all over the world since the 90s. In 2009, they were doing a leg in the British Isles, which wrapped up with a show in Dublin on October 13th. With a few days before their next show, 3 of the band's 5 members chose to use their time off to fly home to Sweden to see their families. The other 2, bassist Martin Mendez and keyboardist Per Wiberg, stayed on the Opeth tour bus as it traveled to their next show in Brussels, Belgium. On the way, the bus came across a car parked sideways across a lane. The bus driver tried to switch lanes to avoid a collision, but the other driver backed into the other lane first, causing the tour bus to hit the much smaller vehicle at full speed. There was only one person in the car, a 35-year-old male, and he was still alive when paramedics arrived. But sadly, he died at the scene, and police ultimately found his suicide note among the wreckage. Thankfully, no one in Opeth's touring party was injured in the crash. Formed in Portland in 2001, the Exploding Hearts had a clear love for 1970s music, and thoughtfully combined the catchy hooks of power pop and new wave with more classic punk instrumentation. After releasing their first album, Guitar Romantic, in 2003, the band was building some buzz and played a handful of shows in the western US to support it. After playing a show in San Francisco on July 20, 2003, the band and their manager started driving back up Interstate 5. About 100 miles south of Portland, bassist Matt Fitzgerald reportedly lost control of the vehicle. The van flipped twice, ejecting Fitzgerald, drummer Jeremy Gage, and singer Adam Baby Cox before coming to a stop on the side of the road. Authorities pronounced Gage and Cox dead at the scene of the crash, and Fitzgerald passed away in the hospital later that day. Guitarist Terry Six and their manager were the only survivors, and Six was treated for superficial injuries.
It was an exhaustion and overcorrection in an old van.
In recent years, Six has played a handful of Exploding Hearts shows with a new lineup, and Third Man Records even re-released Guitar Romantic. Dance bands dominated Irish music in the 1970s, and the Miami Showband was one of the best. Unfortunately, the group's heyday occurred at the same time as the Troubles, a decades-long and violent conflict between the Irish Republican Army, who wanted to unite Ireland and Northern Ireland, and the Loyalists, who wished for the country to remain part of the UK. In July 1975, the Miami Showband played a show in Banbridge, Northern Ireland, before heading south toward Dublin. On their way, a group of Loyalists posing as an Army patrol unit stopped the band's bus and attempted to plant a bomb. The Loyalists had planned for the device to explode when the band arrived in the North Irish city of Newry. To make it look like an Irish band had attacked Northern Ireland, they hoped that the violence would lead to enhanced security measures throughout Northern Ireland, making things more difficult for the IRA. Instead, the bomb went off while the Loyalists were still hanging around the bus, and 2 of their own were killed in the explosion. The Loyalists then started firing, killing singer Fran O'Toole and guitarist Tony Garrity. Bassist Stephen Travers was thrown into bushes by the blast, and trumpet player Brian McCoy was shot while trying to pull him to safety. Saxophonist Des Lee and Travers were the only band members to survive.
I don't have flashbacks. The thing is always in front of you. It's part of your life, and it's a life that you don't want to lead sometimes.
Josh Turner is something of a country traditionalist. Evoking some of the genre's pioneers with his deep voice and old-fashioned songs, Turner has a cult following spread around the U.S. In 2019, he was on a West Coast tour when, on the way from California to the Central Washington State Fair, tragedy struck on the road. Turner's touring party was traveling in several vehicles, with the bulk of the road crew riding in the same tour bus. About 20 minutes outside of Paso Robles, the bus driver lost control of the vehicle. The bus then flew off the road, passed over a shoulder of dirt, and plowed through a fence before plummeting down a 50-foot cliff. The bus ultimately came to a stop in a dried-out riverbed. 7 people on board sustained serious injuries, and crew member David Turner sadly died in the crash.
On September 27, 1986, Metallica was in Sweden promoting their latest release, Master of Puppets. They were heading to their next tour date when, just before 7 a.m., their driver skidded on a patch of black ice and lost control. The tour bus flipped and threw bassist Cliff Burton through a window. What happened next is told differently by people on the scene, but they do all agree that the bus landed on top of Burton and killed the 24-year-old musician. There were questions as to whether the accident could have been prevented, but an investigation cleared the driver of any wrongdoing. In a bizarre footnote, Burton was sleeping on a top bunk when the accident happened, and he'd ended up there because of a single draw from a deck of cards. He and guitarist Kirk Hammett drew cards to see who was going to get the pick of the bunks, and Burton won with the ace of spades. He chose the bunk that Hammett had been using, and that choice ultimately led to his death.
I still miss Cliff, no doubt, and I'd love to see him again at some point.
Stevie Ray Vaughan's 136th show In Step tour kicked off on May 4th, 1989. It ended with an epic outing featuring Eric Clapton, but that was followed by a tragic helicopter accident that took away one of music's most respected guitarists. After the show at Wisconsin's Alpine Valley Musical Theater, a group of 4 helicopters were on hand to fly the performers back to their Chicago hotel. One of the choppers had been reserved for Vaughan, his brother Jimmy, and Jimmy's wife Connie. Some of Clapton's entourage was already on board though, so Stevie asked Jimmy and Connie if he could take the last seat. It was only the next morning that reports started to go out that the chopper had never reached its destination, and when friends found Vaughan's hotel room empty, they suspected the worst. Shortly after 7 a.m., Jimmy was called and asked to identify his brother's body. Stevie Ray Vaughan, along with everyone else on the chopper, had died only half a mile into the flight when the pilot banked sharply in the fog and collided with a ski slope. Eerily, only the day before, Vaughan had shared a disturbing dream with his bandmates in which he was a witness to his own funeral. He was only 35 when he died. The end of 2014 was a bad time for the Celtic punk band Dropkick Murphys. On November 13th, lead singer Al Barr received word that a childhood friend had passed away. He announced to fans that he was going to be unable to make their next scheduled show in Tulsa, Oklahoma, as he would be flying out to attend his friend's funeral. But to add to the tragedy, the band never made it to the airport. Instead, they announced that they were canceling their Tulsa show after their tour bus hit and killed a pedestrian who had run into the highway in front of them. The Boston Globe later identified the man as a 23-year-old father of 1. The band expressed their condolences and requested that their fans keep the man's family in their prayers. The family returned the sentiment with sympathies to all the band members involved and to the bus driver. Black Sabbath had given Ozzy Osbourne the boot in 1979, but by the early 80s, things were sort of back on track. Part of the credit for that should go to guitarist Randy Rhoads. On March 19th, bus driver Andrew Aycock, who had an expired pilot's license, hopped in a small 1955 Beechcraft Bonanza plane with Rhoads and a woman named Rachel Youngblood. With Osbourne and the rest of his band asleep on the tour bus, Aycock buzzed the bus a few times before losing control, hitting a tree, and crashing into a house. Aycock, Rhoads, and Youngblood were all killed instantly. The incident had a lasting impact on the other band members, particularly bassist Rudy Sarzo, who parted ways with Ozzy and returned to the band Quiet Riot after the accident. Sarzo later spoke out about how difficult it was to go on stage without Rhoads. Because of that pain, he chose to leave a hugely successful band so that he could enjoy playing again. It was Ozzy's wife Sharon Osbourne who pushed the band to move on. Within a week and a half, they were back on tour with replacement guitarist Bernie Torme, but memories of Randy Rhoads continue to live on. Gary Numan, the musician best known for the 1979 new wave hit Cars, is still touring and recording new music. In 2018, he announced that he was going to tour to support his 22nd album Savage, Songs from a Broken World. That was in April, and in September, he canceled a show at the Cleveland House of Blues after his tour bus was involved in a tragic accident. The bus was making a right turn when it collided with a 91-year-old man who had been pushing a cart through a crosswalk. The man died at the scene and was given last rites by a priest from a nearby church. Numan canceled the show and issued a statement that read in part, "We are utterly devastated by the fatal accident involving our tour bus earlier today. Every one of us is filled with a sadness that made it impossible to even consider playing our show this evening, and out of respect, it would have been entirely wrong. At the moment, all we can think about are the people affected by this terrible tragedy, and to them, we send our love." Lynyrd Skynyrd's iconic 1977 album Street Survivors had hit shelves only a few days before the band members boarded their leased 30-year-old plane in spite of many misgivings. They'd already played 5 shows on the tour, and it had gone well. They had plans to upgrade their old Convair 240 to a Learjet, and their 600-mile flight from Greenville, South Carolina to Baton Rouge, Louisiana was supposed to be one of their last trips in the Convair. And it was, but not for the reasons they thought. Survivors of the accident said that nearly everyone on board had reservations about the trip. Those concerns were amplified by the fact that just a few days earlier, flames had been seen spitting from one of the engines. But lead vocalist Ronnie Van Zant was adamant that they move forward, pushing everyone with these fateful words. "Hey, if the Lord wants you to die on this plane, when it's your time, it's your time. Let's go, man. We've got a gig to do." The plane ran out of fuel towards the end of the flight. The pilots attempted an emergency landing, but ended up crashing into a large tree. Van Zant, guitarist vocalist Steve Gaines, and his sister, backing vocalist Cassie Gaines, all lost their lives in the Mississippi swamps. Strangely, Van Zant had been convinced that he would die before he turned 30, and he was indeed just a few months shy of his 30th birthday when the plane went down. There's no denying that a single decision can change the course of an entire life, and for Reba McEntire, that decision happened in 1991. She and her band had finished a show in San Diego and were heading to their next gig. She decided to spend one more night along with her husband and stylist in California, while the others went on ahead in two separate planes. One plane arrived, but tragedy struck the other one as it carried 8 of McEntire's closest friends and bandmates. One of the plane's wings clipped a rock protruding from the side of Otay Mountain. No one survived the crash. Other country music superstars stepped up, even offering to give McEntire their own backing band so she could continue on and finish her tour, though she declined. She continued to memorialize the crash and remember those she lost, dedicating her next album, For My Broken Heart, to those who died in the crash. She visited the crash site on the 25th anniversary of the tragedy and posted a message on Facebook. "I feel in my heart that they know we still miss them so much. My love and prayers to all the families and friends."
I mean, if you've got somebody you love, you better tell them, because things can happen in an instant to change your life and do things that make you happy.
Trace Adkins was already at the CenturyTel Center in Bossier City, Louisiana in 2010 for his scheduled show when he got the news that his tour bus had been involved in a horrific accident just north of Shreveport. The bus had collided head-on with a Ford F-250 truck. 5 members of Adkins' band who were on the bus suffered only minor injuries. However, the 2 men who were in the truck were killed. According to the official investigation, the truck had been swerving as it approached the bus, and the bus driver was unable to avoid it. Ultimately, the cause of the accident was ruled to be driver fatigue. The men in the truck had been up for around 24 hours at the point of the accident and were on their way home from an all-nighter at a nearby casino. Adkins played a scaled-down version of his show following the accident and canceled his following show in Pensacola, Florida. In 2015, metalcore band The Ghost Inside were on their way from a gig in Texas to their next show in Phoenix when they were involved in a catastrophic accident. They were just outside El Paso when a truck hit their tour bus head-on. At first, details were sketchy. NME reported that the bus driver and one person in the other vehicle had been killed, while drummer Andrew Tkachuk had been seriously injured. In the immediate aftermath, Andrew's brother Nick said that Andrew had suffered head trauma, a shoulder injury, and broken bones. It later came out that Andrew had spent 10 days in a coma and had one of his legs amputated. It wasn't until 2018 that it was reported that it might be possible that the group would play again. Tkachuk had been fitted with a prosthetic that wasn't ideal for playing, but his father built a device that adapted his drums to his missing leg.
Otis Redding, the 26-year-old well driller turned megastar, died not long after unseating Elvis Presley as the Melody Maker's top male vocalist. He was seeing the fruits of his labors, too. The tour that he died on was the first tour where he was using his own newly purchased private plane. Redding and his backing group, the Bar-Kays, were only 4 miles from their destination, the Madison Municipal Airport in Madison, Wisconsin, when the plane crashed into a nearby lake. The area was covered with fog, and days later, rescue divers were still dredging the lake, trying to recover any possible survivors of the crash. There was one survivor, Ben Cawley. A seat cushion saved his life, and he, along with fellow Bar-Kay member James Alexander, who was on another plane, rebuilt the group and later toured with Isaac Hayes, Aretha Franklin, and the Doobie Brothers. Any accident like this is terrible, but the deaths of the Bar-Kays were particularly heartbreaking as they were still in high school. In fact, according to Billboard, some were so young they needed permission slips from their parents to miss school and go on the tour. There's a footnote here, too. CL Tampa Bay says the accident came just 3 days after Redding recorded what would be one of his most iconic songs, Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay. As it turns out, some details of the famous recording were actually released unfinished.
The whistling at the end of that song? Well, that was because he always intended to go back in and add more lyrics after that trip to Cleveland, never getting the chance.
In the late 1950s, Eddie Cochran's bouncy guitar and raspy vocals helped write the blueprint for the first wave of rock and roll. While still in his teens, Cochran repeatedly hit the upper reaches of the pop chart with his songs about partying and youthful frustration, particularly Summertime Blues and Come On Everybody. According to history, Cochran's rougher-edged rock and roll remained popular in the UK in the 1960s, after softer pop had supplanted the genre on the US charts. The trends across the pond prompted Cochran and fellow early rock and roll star Gene Vincent to go on tour in the UK. The shows proved so popular that Cochran and Vincent added an additional 10 weeks' worth of performances. On April 16, 1960, the duo played a concert in Bristol and hired a cab to drive them to the London airport. The driver lost control on a windy section of highway late at night near Chippenham and hit a lamppost. Vincent suffered a collarbone injury, while Cochran was thrown out of the car upon impact. Hours later, he died from the effects of a head injury. He was just 21 years old. According to Rolling Stone, folksy singer-songwriter Jim Croce had given up on music and gotten a job in construction after his early album Jim and Ingrid Croce flopped. Fortunately for music listeners, ABC Dunhill Records gave him a second chance, signing Croce to record a couple of singles. Both songs, You Don't Mess Around with Jim and Operator, reached the top 20 of the pop chart in 1972. The success prompted the recording of a full-length album and led to Croce achieving a #1 hit with Bad Bad Leroy Brown in April 1973. Just 6 months later, Croce was dead. According to the Associated Press, Croce booked a string of concerts at colleges in 1973, and after playing a show at Northwestern Louisiana University, he and his band boarded a small chartered plane to make it to their next show in Sherman, Texas. Unable to reach a safe altitude, the plane crashed right after takeoff, striking a tree 250 feet past the runway. 6 people in the vehicle died, including Croce's opening act, comedian George Stevens, guitarist Maurice Muleisen, manager Dennis Rast, booking agent Kenneth Dominic Cortez, pilot Robert Newton Elliott, and Croce himself. The singer was just 30 years old. In the late 2010s, Hers was an indie rock duo on the rise.
Everything they were doing was looking great, so there's just a lot of buzz around that band and someone we really believed in.
Featured on BBC Introducing, they released their first record, Invitation to Hers, in 2018, which was well received by indie rock fans in the US and the UK. Hers was comprised of Stephen Fitzpatrick and Auden Loading, who met while attending the Liverpool Institute of the Performing Arts. Rock critics enjoyed the band, with The Guardian likening them to the Smiths and Aztec Camera. In 2019, according to CNN, Hers embarked on a 19-day tour across the United States. On March 26, the duo played a show in Phoenix and embarked on the more than 300-mile journey to their next tour date, Santa Ana, California. In the early morning hours of March 27th, the group's vehicle was involved in a head-on collision with a pickup truck. The driver of the truck died, as did all 3 people in the van, both 24-year-old Fitzpatrick and 25-year-old Loading of Hers and their tour manager. Rick Nelson was one of the very first rock and roll stars. He was also the prototypical musical teen idol, crooning instant hits each week on The Adventures of Ozzy and Harriet, the long-running sitcom he starred in alongside his family. After a string of hits in the late 1950s like I'm Walking, Poor Little Fool, and Lonesome Town, Nelson had a major comeback hit with the bitter country rock lament Garden Party.
They didn't accept him, so he wrote a song that kicked their butts.
According to the New York Times, following a December 1985 show in Guntersville, Alabama, Nelson and his band took the musician's DC-3 airplane to Dallas, where they were to play a New Year's Eve gig at the Park Suite Hotel. Eyewitnesses saw the plane circling above the northeastern Texas town of DeKalb. Responding to the ominous activities, the Texas Department of Public Safety dispatched a helicopter to assist, and Nelson's pilot reported an onboard fire and that he needed to make an emergency landing. Moments later, the plane, engulfed in flames, careened into a forest and hit a power line on the way down, causing the aircraft to explode upon hitting the trees. The pilot and co-pilot survived, albeit badly burned. 7 passengers all died, including a 45-year-old Nelson, his fiancée, and his band. February 3, 1959 was forever immortalized as the day the music died, and for good reason. On that day, a horrible plane crash claimed the lives of the legendary rock and roll pioneers Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and J.P. Richardson Jr., better known as the Big Bopper. They had just finished playing a show in Iowa as part of their Winter Dance Party Tour, a series of shows that was riddled with notoriously poor traveling conditions. According to The Independent, they were faced with a 400-mile journey to their next gig, and no one wanted to make the trip on their freezing, malfunctioning tour bus. Holly decided to charter a private plane, but there were only so many seats. Holly took one, Valens won another on a coin toss, and another musician, Waylon Jennings, gave his seat to Richardson, who was suffering from the flu. For the rest of his life, Jennings would be haunted by the good-natured but, in hindsight, horrible exchange he had with Holly just before the plane took off. Holly jokingly said, "I hope your damned bus freezes up again." In response, Jennings quipped, "I hope your old plane crashes." There were no survivors. Combining hard rock, punk, and emo, Bayside helped create and capture the definitive sound of the early 2000s. As All Music reports, the band formed in the Bayside neighborhood of Queens, New York in 2000. They quickly released a couple of EPs before signing with Victory Records and putting out their first 2 full-length albums. In 2005, their self-titled LP became the band's first release to hit the Billboard album chart, not the easiest feat for an alternative band on an indie label. Weeks later, Bayside's tour took them through the American West. While heading to a show in Salt Lake City as a support act for Hawthorne Heights, their van encountered an icy section of highway near Cheyenne, Wyoming. The vehicle flipped and landed on its roof. Bassist Nick Gambarian and drum tech Dan Marino were severely injured, hospitalized with broken backs, and needed surgery. Drummer John Beats Houlihan died as a result of injuries suffered in the accident. He was 31 years old. Ultra-smooth, utterly sophisticated soft rock had a big cultural moment in the late 1970s, and few embody that era more than Chuck Mangione. He's one of the few players of the flugelhorn, a brass instrument related to the trumpet, to ever achieve major pop success, according to the Washington Post. What's more, he achieved this feat with Feel So Good, a lyrics-free, easy listening jam with a hokey melody played by Mangione himself, and accompanied by some funky, disco-adjacent rhythm and bass. It went to number 4 on the pop chart and was the first of many times Mangione would score on the adult contemporary chart. On the evening of February 12, 2009, according to the CBC, a flight departed from Newark, New Jersey, in the direction of Buffalo Niagara International Airport in New York. Among the 49 passengers were Gary Nywood and Coleman Mellett, saxophone player and guitarist in Chuck Mangione's backing and touring band. They were scheduled to play with Mangione in the Buffalo Philharmonic, a show that was canceled after the musician's plane crashed into a residence outside Buffalo. According to NPR, all 49 passengers died, including 64-year-old Nywood, who'd played with Mangione in the 60s and 70s, and 33-year-old Mellett. In the mid-1990s, dance pop duo La Bouche scored a string of hits in Europe and the US with songs like Be My Lover and Sweet Dreams. According to MTV, producer Frank Farian put the group together, pairing soulful Atlanta-born singer Melanie Thornton with rapper Lane McRae. Following 3 La Bouche albums, Thornton gave a solo career a try, and even landed a hit in Germany with Ready to Fly. In November 2001, 2 days before the release of her follow-up single Wonderful Dream, Thornton died in an aviation accident. The singer was a passenger on a small plane that departed Berlin, Germany, bound for Zurich, Switzerland, where Thornton was scheduled to perform. Just before the plane could safely land, it crashed in a forest near the airport, according to the Associated Press. Thornton was among the 24 people on board who died. The singer was 33.